Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? Lots of love to you. I do hope you're doing remarkably well, and I hope you're enjoying yourself and making the most of every day, because life is such a lovely gift. And we've got a fabulous story today for you, which is going to enrich your life as they always do. So before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, I'd been staying in a glamorous hotel in Seattle for a couple of days, where the new advances in dental healthcare were being debated at this meeting with dentists from all over the country. It was always important for me to keep abreast and au fait with modern advances in medicine, as things always progressively evolve in cutting-edge dental materials and techniques. You can easily be left behind, so staying systematically current in any medical field is significantly important. I have always been peculiarly passionate about teeth since I was a young boy. I'd make big efforts to brush even my pets' teeth fastidiously, always ensuring that they were spotlessly clean. Ostensibly, it was an empowering feeling to have given our pets the gift of great oral health throughout their lives that had impressed and somewhat bewildered our vet, who swore that our family dogs had the cleanest teeth he had the pleasure to see. My mother would watch me brushing my dog's teeth with a measure of amusement on her face. She would say, "Why, I do believe that you're going to be a dentist when you grow up." I guess her vague passing comments just stuck like chewing gum in my mind, which was why becoming a dentist was a no-brainer to me. I do get clients terrified of dentists. It takes them all their courage to make an appointment with me. But usually they come when the pain from a tooth is so dogmatically tenacious and it's causing them such physical distress that by then they're literally begging to see me. In truth, if they'd been visiting my practices more regularly, they would have been able to avoid a great deal of pain, abscesses, root canals, and a hell of a lot of unnecessary dental work and expense. I live near Bozeman, Montana, which is about an 8-hour drive from Seattle. So when we finished the dental course, I was well on my way home so I could get back to my wife and our 2 kids by about 10 o'clock at night, if all went according to schedule, without any fortuitous hiccups along the way. I knew then that they would be fast asleep in bed, including my wife, who had learnt from experience to never wait up for me. By all accounts, when she did, she claimed she was always jinxed. On one occasion there was a multiple pile-up on the interstate, and I arrived home 5 hours later than I envisaged. If you're travelling by road, especially on a long drawn-out journey, there is always the possibility of delay. I know this firsthand from my own personal bitter experience. One journey can go smoothly, another one can be a tiresome obstacle course, depending on weather conditions and traffic. Bozeman, Montana sits among the Gallatin Mountains, just north of the entrance to the Yellowstone National Park. Bozeman is a ranching town and is home to Montana State University. It is famous for its pristine landscape, wild indigenous animals, and a more freer way of life. Many celebrities like Michael Keaton and Jeff Bridges have claimed their piece of paradise here in the nearby Paradise Valley, which is flanked by the Absaroka Range to the east and the Gallatin Range to the west, which is a ranch spanning more than 9,000 acres, purchased by Arthur Blank, the owner of the NFL Atlanta's Falcon football team. When I was getting close to home, I decided to take the quintessential back road. I had driven this road at night on a handful of occasions before. I had spotted some interesting wildlife on this particular spot, the most spectacular being the hugest mountain lion I've ever had the privilege to see, with 3 of her magnificent cubs. I remember she was arrestingly beautiful. She stood in the middle of the road, fully aware of me and my truck. I immediately switched off the engine and continued to watch her with the light of my vehicle pinned directly on her. You could tell these cats had great night vision, as their eyes gave off this reflective yellow eyeshine. The mountain lion was not intimidated by my presence or my vehicle. She stood in the road, washing her cubs affectionately, one by one, with her large pink tongue, rather like a domestic tabby, preening its beloved kittens. She would occasionally look up at me, as she knew I was watching her. She didn't appear to mind. Then she did the craziest thing. She jumped on the hood of my Land Rover and scanned the environment, as if watching the view from a watchtower, with her cute, adorable cubs still playing on the road mischievously with each other. I think one of the small cubs was trying to attack the other's tail, as if it was a great big game. As it would seem from an early age, the desire to chase anything that moves and runs is ingrained in their predatory instincts. This is why they often warn you not to run away from a predator, as you make yourself a soft target, as they're fueled with a knee-jerk spontaneous desire to chase anything that moves. Indeed, I've seen it with our own 2 tabby cats at home. On one occasion my cat was outsmarted by a mouse, as it refused to run, and they got so bored with the little thing, they gave up the chase. At one point in time my cat actually had the mouse in his throat, and its little nose was sticking out of its mouth as if it was peering out of a hole in the wall. That must have been one hell of an experience for the poor little mite. In hindsight, maybe the mouse was frozen in terror and just couldn't move, but its savvy antics literally saved its life. After the mountain lion had scanned her environment, she then bounced off the hood of my car onto the road, and then she and her 3 little cubs followed behind her as she disappeared into the brush. I remember I was so incredibly thrilled to have had an experience like that. I considered one of the perks of living in this prepossessing part of the world. On another occasion I saw a grizzly bear pass my field of vision on this exact same stretch of road, who looked none too pleased to have seen me. He roared at me, quickly retreated into the woodgrove to make a hasty escape, but for a brief second we had eye contact together, and that is about as close and personal to a grizzly bear I was ever going to get. Yet despite everything, I considered it a remarkable interaction. After the dental conference in Seattle, which I attend like clockwork twice a year, I found myself down that same remote stretch of road again, where I'd encountered the mountain lion. Little did I know that I would have an experience so bizarre it would scare the bejesus out of me. In truth, returning home seemed as commonplace as any other night of the week, and I was hanging on to the hope that I might see some wildlife on this stretch of road. I have always enjoyed living in the moment, so driving at night can invite opportunities for you to observe creatures you would never normally be privy to encountering, for many of them come out at night. Of course, as can be expected, there was not a solitary soul in sight, and although the road was asphalted, there were no street lights anywhere. It was late autumn. There was a feisty wind blowing, and quite an angry biting nip in the air. It was an inauspicious, bodeful night, for the moon seemed to be squatting furtively behind some murky cloud cover, and had prudently shrunk into the shadows, making the night appear all the more menacing and foreboding. I remember thinking to myself that this was a night when you didn't want to be out alone in your truck like I was. There was a mocking, taunting atmosphere from the treed embankments, as they seemed to whisper among themselves, their contemptuous boughs jiggling, their rustling leaves almost laughing provocatively. It was like they were surreptitiously watching me, with sultry, hostile eyes, making the drive for me seem hauntingly spooky. In truth, it would have been the quintessential perfect setup for a Hollywood horror movie, when any minute you would almost expect to see some robotic zombies emerging through the trees, covered in curtains of decomposing flesh, their faces white, their eyes dead. I was pondering all this when something horrifying happened, which symbolically accommodated my thoughts so articulately, almost as if I'd invited this moment to play out in my reality. I suddenly spot a woman running across the road. She was wearing a white nightdress, bespeckled with bloody droplets. She is terrified. For a second her frightened brown eyes hold mine in a stare, and her long mane of dark hair that curtains her face in limp locks looks dishevelled. My natural instinct is to press down the accelerator and to get the hell out of there. I instinctively sensed something was off about her, but I didn't know what it was. But supposing she was a manic, deranged lunatic who had butchered her husband in an angry frenzy. I knew there was a colonial house somewhere not far from here. Maybe something bad had happened there. It's amazing how your mind can presume the worst when you're on a desolate, dark, lonely country road. And when the fertile seeds of your imagination germinate, creating all kinds of crazed, warped scenarios to play out in your imagination, I then consider that the woman could be a victim of her husband's wrath and possibly needs my help. So I need to do the right thing by her, even though my senses are screaming to leave the woman well alone and to get out of here. I realize if I don't help the woman, I'll always have to live with the remorseful, penitent regret that I may have failed a frightened woman who might be in need of my help, and my conscience persuades me reluctantly to do the right thing by her, with a vacillating, somewhat wobbling incertitude. I amble after the woman, gripped with an unwilling compunction that shackles my confidence fiercely. The woman turned around, with a demure, ambivalent look on her face, as if pondering whether she can put her faith in me or not. Then finally she nods in agreement, and gratefully follows me to the truck, obviously having decided she can trust me. I open up the truck door for her. She gives me a grateful, thankful nod, and sits down eagerly on the passenger's seat next to mine. As I start up the engine, to my astonishment I realize she's wearing no shoes on her feet. How could she possibly go running around that wood grove, with bracken, sharp twigs, jutting rocks, thorns, obtrusive vegetation that may not be very merciful to delicate feet? Let's just say, up until this point, she hadn't uttered a word to me. I wasn't surprised. I envisaged she'd been through some kind of trauma. I mean, the blood spots on her linen nightdress spoke of an unfortunate incident. I figured that I'd take her back home to the wife, as possibly she'd be more comfortable confiding in another woman. Besides, my wife used to be a nurse, so if anyone could help this young lady out, it would be her. "Where would you like to go? Do you need the police, or do you want me to take you home?" "I was thinking it might be best to take you to my house, if you'd like to talk to a woman. My wife is a very good listener. She could help you out if you need to talk with her. You're covered in blood. Did someone hurt you? Was it your husband? You can talk to me if you like. I don't bite." The young woman does not answer my question. She stares vacantly ahead of her, almost as if I don't exist, and as if she's deaf to my very words. Looking back, I don't even think she spoke to me at all, but merely nodded. Her face was obscured by her long dark hair, that conveniently curtained it, possibly on purpose, I thought. Maybe she was timorously shy, and hiding behind her hair. I do recall that her scared brown eyes were terrified. So I decide I'd take her to my home. My wife can talk to her. I discern she doesn't want to talk to me, and I can understand that. For a fleeting second my eyes dart down to her feet, and they're no longer there. But I see the corner of her nightdress, but there's no feet, no legs. In that moment I'm filled with a discomposing terror. What the hell, I think? I saw her feet only a moment ago. There are no words to describe the icy Arctic chill that meandered down my spine in that moment. I thought I was losing it. It had never occurred to me that there was anything outer-worldly or idiosyncratic about this woman. She seemed like the girl next door, only covered in blood and very afraid. I then glanced up at her face and discovered to my horror that she's not even in my car. I'm now confounded. Where on earth did she go? She was here a moment ago. Now she's gone. I would have heard her if she'd got out of the car. I stop the car, climb out of my car seat, closing the door behind me, skimming the landscape with my eyes, using the torch that I always carry with me. I look around. I see a flash of her white gown rushing into the wood grove. She glances over her shoulders back at me, her eyes filled with terror. In that sobering moment, I know she's a ghost, in every fibre of my being. She has to be. There is no plausible explanation for what has just transpired. When I returned to the truck, I felt the area where she'd been sitting, and it was like touching an ice block, while my seat remained lovely and warm. In that moment, I am so freaked out that I drive home like a bat out of hell. My wife is fast asleep upstairs when I open the front door, trying to be discreet. I amble over to the bar, where I pour myself a stiff drink to compose my now rattled nerves. Did I really see that? My body is shaking like a leaf. Unbeknown to me, my wife had heard the sound of my car purring down the drive. She'd heard me park in the parking bay and switch off the engine. So she left her bedroom, dashed down the sweeping staircase in search of me, to find out how the dental conference went. She pads into the bar so quietly that I didn't see her there. And of course she's wearing a white nightgown. What are the chances of that? And when I see her in my peripheral vision, I nearly jump out of my skin, I'm so alarmed. I let out a loud shriek. I thought the strange woman in white had followed me home. "What the hell is going on?" says my wife, looking at me through wide, earnest eyes. "Why are you drinking stiff alcohol? Why are you screaming at me? And why the hell are you shaking so much?" "You scared the hell out of me. You gave me the fright of my life, pouncing on me like that." "Oh dear, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to startle you. What's going on? Why do you look so freaked out? You've gone as white as a sheet." "I've only just gone and seen a ghost on the back road, where I once saw that mountain lion, do you remember, and her cubs? The very same stretch of road, not far from that colonial home. I always see something a little idiosyncratic on the road, but a ghost I didn't expect to see. And can you believe it? I picked her up to give her a lift." "What?" says my wife, cradling her hand over her mouth in astonishment. "Where? When? How do you know it was a ghost?" I proceed to tell my wife my incredulous story, and she wasn't best pleased with me, I have to say. "What the hell is wrong with you? Why would you stop for a woman like that? Supposing there was something seriously wrong with her. You were an isolated stretch of road, for goodness sake. Thanks a bunch for thinking you could bring a woman like that home to me. I wish to God you wouldn't drive home that way. Anything could be out there. You hear stories of strange creatures, odd sightings that people can't explain." Of course, I knew my wife was right. She usually was about most things. But in the days and weeks that followed, instead of feeling a reluctance about going the back way again, I was now more curious than ever about what I'd encountered that night, and I pondered a great deal about the ghost I'd seen, and wondered about her story. Little did I know that answers would be forthcoming sooner than I imagined. One night me and my wife had been invited to dinner with the very couple who lived in the colonial house, not far from that stretch of road, where I encountered the woman in white. My wife made friends with a young woman called Monica, who lived there, as my son Blake was 4 at the time, and was at preschool, or nursery school if you like, with her son Richard. It would seem the two women had struck up an unlikely friendship. "Oh, you really must come to my house for dinner," she told my wife. "We live in an old colonial house, saturated with such a rich history." She lowered her voice and whispered, "It's haunted, you know." "And that doesn't bother you?" my wife had asked her incredulously. "Oh, heavens no. I don't worry about things like that. I love to live in a place with a rich, vibrant history. It gives the place character, charm, personality. From the first moment I saw the house, I had to have it. Of course, my husband wasn't terribly pleased. He couldn't stand the place. He said it made him feel uneasy. Liam prefers more modern ranch-style homes, you see. He thinks the colonial architecture is dated. I completely disagree. It's modern architecture that dates. But classic buildings, they're timeless. I reminded my husband that happy wife means happy life. I always bring that up when I want to get my way with him. It usually works, because it's true. Let's just say for a while he huffed and puffed about it. Took me to see some more modern ranch-style homes, in the hope that I'd fall in love with a more modern home. But my husband, as usual, underestimated me. And when I visited those locations, I wanted the colonial all the more. Indeed, it made me realise that I just had to have it, as all the other houses seemed so flat, rather like champagne without the sparkle or fizz. My husband got the fright of his life when the estate agent phoned him up and said, "Sir, I'm very glad to inform you that your offer on the colonial has been accepted." "You didn't, did you?" my wife gasped. "Behind your husband's back? Oh, my word! If it was my husband, he'd have kittens if I made a huge decision like that, without his agreement." "Well, I knew I had to do it," Monica explains. "My husband can be slow to make up his mind about things, you see. He's a Libra, you know, always wavering and vacillating about whether to do this or that. Do you know he seemed kind of relieved that the decision had been taken out of his hands? Maybe that's why he's attracted to you, says my wife. Maybe your decisiveness means things are a lot easier for him. I never thought of it like that, says Monica, but you might just be right. Did the estate agent tell you your house was haunted when you bought it? Are you kidding? Of course not. At the time I didn't believe in ghosts anyway, but I've changed my mind about that now. But how do you know your house is haunted? Because my husband has seen the ghost a couple of times. We often hear feet walking up and down the landing, and sometimes I hear raised voices, but nothing is ever there. Let's just say we've had some bizarre experiences at my home. One time when me and my husband were sitting in the bar, having drinks, a wine glass lifted off the bar on its own accord. It levitated at about 1/2 foot above the table, and then went crashing across the wall, where it shattered into hundreds of pieces, which scattered around the room everywhere. It made quite a startling noise, I hasten to say. At the time we had company, a couple of guests for dinner actually, who had popped to see us from Seattle. They had known my husband from his university days. They were the kind of couple that just would not leave. They nattered on and on and on, and me and Liam, we were just bored to death. You know those kind of people that just won't ever go. I mean, there's only so long you can hear someone drone on and on about car batteries. In truth, I never knew there was so much to say about the matter until I met the couple, who seemed to find the subject quite riveting. The husband was a mechanic. We were actually thinking, would they ever shut up about car batteries? Suffice to say, after the glass is flung at the bar, that couple fled so fast from our home and have never been back since. It's almost as if the ghost was getting them to leave on our account. I almost suspect that happened as Liam pointed out that maybe the ghost was getting bored too. I'll never forget that woman's face when she suddenly claimed that it was terribly late and they should get back. They told us not to see them out, and boy did they hightail it out of the house so fast, as if terrified that the entity in our home would be after them. I've never seen anyone leave our premises in such haste. It was hilarious. It may have been good to get rid of dull guests that had outstayed their welcome, but still it's scary to have a glass flung from the bar at a wall in front of you like that. It would freak me out if that happened to me, says my wife. Oh dear, I hope I haven't put you off coming to dinner. I assure you, all of our other dinner parties have gone without a hitch. Of course I'm not put off. I'm intrigued, my wife had said. I had never met Monica, nor had I met her husband Liam. At the time, my wife had not mentioned the fact that Monica claimed her house was haunted. I remember when I realised her house was the renovated old colonial, on the back road where I'd seen the ghost in white. I was more than a little stunned about the coincidence, but I actually gave the matter no further thought. How could I have known that the old colonial house and the ghost were unequivocally connected? I was in for the surprise of my life. Suffice to say, Monica and her husband Liam were a very likeable couple. I could see why my wife connected so much with Monica. She was an easygoing, fun-loving person with a fabulous sense of humour, while her husband Liam was more reticent, the retiring type, but nevertheless a very charming gentleman, who was quite eccentric. He wore a tweed jacket, a red cravat around his neck. He had curly brown hair, bushy eyebrows that seriously needed grooming, and long sideburns, which gave him an old-fashioned, poetic kind of look. I half expected him to say he was a writer or a poet, but it turned out he was an engineer. I wasn't surprised at all to see that the couple had a library, with floor-to-ceiling shelves with leather-bound books, some of them easily over 100 years old, while Monica had shelves of cookery books that were so ancient they were long since out of date. She claimed she thoroughly enjoyed recreating some of those old 1800 recipes. The house, which had been renovated 5 years prior, was absolutely stunning. I could almost certainly see why Monica had fallen in love with the place. By contrast, I felt our modern double-storey farmhouse where we lived seemed more pedestrian, nondescript, rather bland, whereas the Kalinsky household felt as if it was steeped in a rich history. It felt like you were being swept back to another time. I was almost envious, although not quite. I did think that wandering down the airy corridors at night, with those large opulent rooms with their high ceilings and dramatically grandiose chandeliers, could be more than a little intimidating, and being in a historic house that was so large when you're alone would not be a comfortable experience, especially if you were to hear strange sounds at night. Monica was an exceptional hostess who knew how to cook. Her table was laid superbly, so superbly in fact that the glasses actually twinkled and gleamed. The silverware shone like a new pin. Flowers accentuated the table with their pretty pastel shades, and to add to the cosy, inviting ambience, there was a fire crackling away happily in the hearth, which was incredibly pleasant, as the weather had turned. Many trees had lost their leaves, and there was a definite chill in the air. I wasn't surprised to learn that in the 90s Monica had been to a finishing school in Berkshire, in the United Kingdom, called Wingfield Place, where she'd learnt cordon bleu cooking and Constance Spry flower arranging. It was a huge white manor house that accommodated the live-in students there, and was the kind of place young women went to learn the art of becoming the perfect wife. It would seem in the good old days many young women from affluent households were expected to marry into wealth. I gather Monica was engaged to a prominent military man from Sandhurst Military Academy when she met Liam, her husband, in a bar in Windsor, and she was happy to meet up with the only other American in the entire pub. Lo and behold, they both discovered they'd grown up living streets apart from each other in Seattle, which seemed rather weird when they'd been so close but so far growing up. It was serendipitous, and after Monica met Liam, they became inseparable. Nowadays, finishing schools I don't believe exist anymore, but let's just say Monica was a domestic goddess, and her food would rival any first-class restaurant. I think my wife felt rather intimidated by what a superb hostess Monica was, but she immediately put my wife at ease and told her to stop being ridiculous. If you'd been to finishing school, you'd also be an amazing cook. I'll tell you what, I'll give you some pointers. My wife's face lit up like a Christmas tree. Seriously, she asked. Of course, I wouldn't have it any other way. Besides, it'll be fun to cook together. We'll have a blast. It wasn't long before my wife piped, "Guess what, sweetheart? Monica was telling me the house here that they have is haunted." At this astonishing revelation, my blood naturally turns cold. I realise in that moment that the ghost that haunts this colonial house is the very same ghost I encountered that inauspicious night when I returned home from the dental conference, the ghost that I actually gave a lift to. My wife realises that the story connects. She gives me an incredulous look as if to say, "My God, you've seen the very same ghost." "Tell them the story, Liam. Don't leave anything out." "It's an incredible story," says Monica excitedly. "You've got to hear this. Believe me, you can't make this stuff up. It goes from the weird to the idiosyncratic. You're not going to believe this story." We are on the cheese course of the meal, which is served the traditional French way before the dessert, and Liam reaches for a cracker, covering it with a gooey slice of brie, and takes a bite. He wipes a few crumbs away from his moustache, while all eyes remain locked on him. For a moment I feel like a child, sitting by a crackling fire, waiting for my grandfather to tell me a remarkable story. I'm champing at the bit to hear it. My heart is pounding in my chest, but there's no reason to get my adrenaline coursing through my veins like this, in a benign, benevolent, cosy environment. But the very mention of the girl in white, the memory of that night when I witnessed her running through the woodgrove, has already caused my hands to start sweating. "Go on," says Monica. "Don't keep our guests in suspense. Tell them the story." "Very well," says Liam. "Where to begin? It was autumn, about the same time of year as it is now. The leaves were changing. The trees looked quite marvellous. For me personally, I love the colour at this time of year. I happened to be drinking a glass of sherry on the back porch. It's a ritual of mine after a long, hard day at the office. I was looking out over the woodgrove, where the sun was setting over the valley. It wasn't even dark then, but I do recall thinking how magnificent it all was, and how I wished I could paint this wonderful view, transfer this transfixing beauty to canvas, capture this near-perfect moment." "You mean this happened during the day?" gasps my wife. "I would say it was late afternoon, early evening," said Liam.
The sun was beginning to set. That was when I saw her. The young lady. I'm not actually sure how old she was. Possibly 23 or 4. I'm not very good with age. But she was young. She had some unfortunate-looking blood specks all over her nightgown or white smock, if you like, although I wasn't sure if they belonged to her or not. But she looked desperately afraid, as if she was running from something or someone. But she was dashing through the wood grove at a mighty speed, the one that finally meets the back road over there. But she looked like she was running from something, asked my wife. Exactly. She seemed desperately afraid, kept glancing back at the house. I remember hearing a man's voice that sounded like a growl, but I never saw anyone. Of course, I didn't know who the hell the girl was, and what she was doing running on our lawn towards the woodgrove. But she looked as real as you and I. I had no reason to suspect she was a ghost. Well, not then. Anyway, I start running after her to ask her if she needs my help. But she just ignores me. I'm saying, "Please, young lady, let me help you." Then I hear this man's raspy breath and feet running past me. But I see nothing. But when I look back at the young girl again, I see she has no legs and feet. It would seem her legs had vanished. It was like her dress and her body were levitating above the ground. Whew, it freaked me out. So in a fit of frenzied fear, I hightailed it as fast as I could through the forest to get back to the house. I realized that this woman was a ghost. I'm so shocked, so disorientated, that like a great big oafish klutz, I don't look where I'm going. I'm so blindsighted, so intent on getting away as fast as I can, that I trip over a large stone jutting through the earth. I almost levitate myself for a moment, falling so violently hard onto the ground with a mighty thud. I hear the horrifying crack that tells me at once I've broken a bone. Oh, the pain I felt was excruciating. I even cry out, it's so agonizing. My wife has no clue where I am at this point. I'm in the woodgrove, I'm struggling to get up, and my ankle is killing me, the pain is so bad. It looks really grim. It's contorted and disfigured, almost hanging precariously off the ankle, my foot I mean. It looks deformed. There's no way I can walk on this leg. And the weirdest thing happens then. I'm still on the ground, trying to scramble to my feet. I'm on my hands and knees, overcome with the weirdest sensation that I'm not alone, that I'm being watched for some reason. For a moment that panicking feeling bubbles over me. I feel cornered, but not by a wild animal, by a ghost. My first thought is that girl in white is coming after me. Then I hear these heavy feet walking over to me, thumping the ground like a booming drum. I hear crackles of leaf litter, the sound of snapping twigs, and then I see it. I had no idea what this thing was, but it was astonishingly human. It must have been about 7 to 8 foot tall, 600 to 700 pounds, I can't be sure. But she was definitely female, because she had breasts. She was covered from head to toe in long, dark, flowing hair, the colour of a black bear. She had quite a leathery grey skin, a furrowed, wrinkled forehead, and these deep-set dark eyes that were the colour of treacle. But they were kind, very intelligent. I would say she was very concerned about me. The creature was very big. Gargantuan shoulders, I have to say. Body solidly muscular. She had a dead squirrel hanging loosely over her shoulders, which I imagine she was planning to eat later as a tasty snack. I should have been petrified, but for a moment I'm rather confused and disorientated. I've just observed this outlandish ghost. I didn't expect to see that. Now I've had a nasty fall, broken my ankle, and now I'm seeing a human-like creature with primate-like influences dashing over to me in the woodgrove. Things could not get more enigmatic. I'm entitled to think that I'm either daydreaming, or I've slammed my head so hard during a fall that I'm now delirious and hallucinating. Or more to the point, did I have more than one shot of sherry, and I'm so drunk I'm seeing things that aren't actually there? The truth was I knew I wasn't dreaming, nor had I drunk too much, nor was I delirious. This creature was real. She bends down and looks at my ankle, and her face registers astonishment. She can't believe my break. She examines my foot that's attached to my ankle and scratches her head in bewilderment. I'm still wincing in pain. She sees I'm hurting, and it troubles her greatly. She wants to fix my problem for me, but my foot, she realizes, is not a problem that she can resolve. I imagine with her strong, robust, powerful bones, injuries like mine are hard for her to even imagine could exist. I try to stagger to my feet, but I can't. I point towards my house. Do you think you can give me a hand? I say to her. I can't believe I'm asking this huge creature to help me. But what I can't believe even more is she understands what I'm saying, even though she doesn't speak a word of English. I know I can trust her. I can sense that she's very, very kind. She immediately picks me up in her arms. She carries me to my front porch, where she puts me on the very chair I sit to watch the sunset in the evenings. And that's when I realize that although I have never seen her before, she is well acquainted with all my quirky ways. She knows where I sit in the late afternoon. She probably knows my wife very well. In a strange way, knowing this gives me a measure of comfort, for this creature has my back. She stands there for a moment, as if she's expecting me to ask her to do something else for me. But I thank her, she nods, and she glides away, and boy does she move so gracefully. I'm confounded by that, I have to say. I found out later that what I'd observed was a Bigfoot. "You're kidding," said my wife. "You saw a Bigfoot and a ghost in the same day. Did you ever see them again?" "I did, as it happens. When my ankle was fixed and I was walking around the wood grove, I saw this head peering at me from behind a tree, and it was the Bigfoot. She moved away from the tree, standing only 3 feet away from me. She looked on me as if I was a great old friend of hers. She was genuinely thrilled to see me. I can't say I know many human beings that are that happy to see me when I cross their path, but this Bigfoot genuinely was. She was so excited to make my acquaintance again, as if I'd been off planet for a decade. She whistled when she saw me, pointed at my ankle, slapped me on the back very gently as if to say, "I'm so pleased you're better." She bent down on her hands and knees to examine my ankle very carefully. She was stroking it. She seemed absolutely mystified. It was like she was saying, "How could you fix an injury that was so distorted, so misshapen?" I told her I had an operation. Not that I could expect her to understand what that was about. But I explained I went under the knife, and she listened to me, as if she understood every word I was saying. She watched my eyes, and it was as if she was reading my thoughts. I sensed she understood everything, although whether she did I don't know. But she walked with me for a long while through the wood grove, and then I heard another whistle. I sensed that was her partner. She tapped me on the shoulders, nodded at me, and glided away. I remember thinking what a beautiful creature she was. So human, so emotionally intelligent, so generous. I was actually sad when she left my side. I don't mind admitting that to you. It was riveting being in her company. Like I sensed she thoroughly enjoyed being with me. As for the ghost of the girl, I did see her wandering across the lawn another evening, and you bet your cotton socks I didn't go chasing after her in the wood grove again. I don't know why I was so frightened by her, but her smock covered in blood droplets was more than a little disturbing for me.
"We found out who the ghost was, didn't we?" said Monica. "You see, after Liam had that weird experience, I checked out the history of the house out of interest. What I learnt was a young woman lived here with her brother. By all accounts, they were close siblings. No one knows what the spat was about, but she punched her brother in the nose, and he spouted blood all over her nightdress and was furious with her. He went running after her because she was running away, across the lawn to the woodgrove. When he found his sister, he punched her so violently hard, unaware of his own strength. He was mortified to discover that his sister wouldn't wake up after he'd hit her. He claimed he cradled her body for ages and sobbed, crying out, 'Oh my God, what have I done? What have I done? Beatrix, please wake up!' When he realized his sister was dead,
He surreptitiously buried her in the woodgrove, and the family issued a missing persons report, as she had disappeared off the face of the earth, and no one knew what had happened to her. I gather he was never the same after her fortuitous demise, as he probably wrestled with guilt over what had transpired all his life. It was only on his deathbed he told his family what had happened, so that they could actually exhume his sister's bones and bury her in the family plot next to him. He wanted to be buried with her. "That's so sad," says my wife. "That's why men should never ever hit women. They don't know their own power. We're the weaker sex, much more fragile than a man is. The poor brother must have been so shocked that a mere punch had killed his sister like that. It's quite frightening when you think about it. I think when my husband saw the girl in the white smock, it was almost a reenactment of the dreadful day when she ran from her brother, being played out in our time-space." "Wow, I see why you're not bothered by the haunting. The ghosts here are benign. They mean you no harm. They're part of the rich fabric of the home," says my wife. "That's exactly how I feel," says Monica. "I like to think she's here in the house with us, and her brother too. They were a very nice family." Let's just say I decided not to share my story about my account with the lady in white. I'm not sure why, but it didn't feel right somehow. As for my wife and Monica, they're the best of friends all these years later, and Monica was true to her promise. She taught my wife to become an incredible cook. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what an incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.